Welcome again to the learning portal for the DP accounting software. Database providers, based in San Diego, California, proudly develops, distributes, and supports this software. In this video, we are going to talk about business expenses. Our objectives are to define a business expense, the types of business expenses, and provide some examples. Then, using the DP accounting software, we'll demonstrate how to add a new expense and the various ways to view expenses. This software provides convenient filters that make it easy to find specific expenses. Furthermore, we'll show the different expense reporting options, allowing you to present your data in a way that suits your needs. Finally, we'll show you how to delete an expense record if it was created in error. Now let's get right into it. Let's first begin by clarifying when to create an expense record. Perhaps the easiest explanation is to record monies that you already spent. Or if you have received a supplier's invoice for a service or product that you already received, and you want to pay that invoice now and bypass recording it as a bill, you can. The size and type of business will usually dictate whether supplier invoices are entered as an expense or entered in the Accounts Payable module as a bill. Two advantages of using the Accounts Payable process is that it helps manage the on-time payments of suppliers' invoices and provide more accurate cash flow projections. To help further explain examples of expenses to record, we are going to record 4 business examples using the DP accounting software. Starting at the main menu, click on the Record Expenses button. For our first example, let's record the purchase of ink cartridges and printer paper for the printer that is used to print out your invoices of your services to your customers. Since many transactions are carried out using credit cards and business checks, our examples will use those as our payment types. Choose the payment type Credit Card. For this first expense entry, choose the party, which is who you purchased this from, by either typing in the name of the supplier or use the drop-down to select the party. Next, add the purchase date or payment date. Since the payment type chosen in this example was the credit card option, the primary credit card account is listed. Verify the credit card used, and if different, either type in the correct one or choose the correct one from the drop-down list. For information on how to manage credit cards, please see one of our videos on how to set up chart of accounts and how to manage suppliers, which includes adding credit card accounts into the supplier record and linking those credit card accounts to specific employees. Continuing on with this expense entry, store receipts do contain a unique transaction ID, but they typically contain a large number of digits. That unique transaction ID can be added into the ref number field. But an alternative method might be just to copy the payment date and add that into the ref number field. Add a reference note for this expense into the ref field. Moving down into the expenses section, you will notice that a default expense account has been added automatically. The default expense account are managed within the supplier record. See our videos on how to manage suppliers' default expense account information for more in-depth look into that. Adding a default expense account not only saves time at expense entry, it also results in a consistent entry of expense account for this specific party or supplier. Having said that, verify the expense account is correct for the expense items being added. If a different expense account is needed for this specific expense entry, type in the expense account name or use the drop-down option to select a different account. If you entered a reference above, you will notice that it was copied into the reference field here. For this example, we will skip the billable, job number, and customer fields and just enter the purchase amount in the amount field. Once the information has been entered and reviewed for completeness and accuracy, click the Save and New button. This will save this expense record and then wait for the next expense entry. This next example will be to record another expense where you have purchased more weed trimmer line, replacement blades for the mowers, and trash bags for the trimmings from your local hardware store, needed for your landscaping business. In this example, we will also add an extra expense line for a trash can that one of your customers asked you to purchase for them, and they would pay you back for it by adding it into their next invoice. Following the same process, the purchase was made using the credit card, so choose credit card as the payment type. Select the party or supplier of the purchase by using the drop-down arrow or by typing in the supplier's name. Enter the purchase or payment date. Again, verify the correct credit card is identified. If not correct, use the drop-down arrow to change the credit card used. Add a reference into the ref field, and then move down to the expenses section. Verify the correct expense account is identified. If this needs to be changed, start typing the account name, or use the drop-down option to select another expense account. Notice the reference added above has been copied into this reference field. We will skip the billable, job number, and customer fields and enter the amount paid, minus the amount of the trash can purchased for the customer. Now click the Add Additional Expense label. This adds a new line into the Expenses section. For this new line, verify the defaulted expense account is correct. If not correct, type in another account name, or use the drop-down to select a different expense account. Enter a specific reference so that this line can be identified and separate from the other. It is strongly recommended that a reference is added so that you know why this separate line was added. Check the billable field and then using the customer drop-down, choose the customer name the trash can was purchased for. Then finally, add the amount of the trash can. Adding this as a separate billable item will prompt it to be added into the next invoice created for this customer. We will demonstrate this feature in another video. Once the information has been entered and reviewed for completeness and accuracy, click the Save and New button. This will save this expense record and then wait for the next expense entry. Our next example is to record an expense for our daily stop at a gas station filling up our gas cans that we use to fill up our landscaping equipment used in today's stops. Again, we used the credit card, so we selected the payment type of credit card, selected the party or supplier, in this case our local gas station, by either typing it in or selecting from the drop-down list. Then, add the purchase or payment date. Verify the credit card used. Use the drop-down option if a different credit card was used. Add a reference in the ref field. Again, adding a reference of each expense entry is strongly recommended. Move down to the Expenses section and enter the amount paid. Once the information has been entered and reviewed for completeness and accuracy, click the Save and New button. This will save this expense record and then wait for the next expense entry. For our last example of entering an expense item, we will use a business check to pay one of our employees' wage or salary for the last pay period of work. For this expense entry, the payment type chosen will be check. Notice that when the expense form opens, the default payment type is check and the primary bank account is identified along with the next check number in the register from that bank account. Select the party. Note this is the employee paid. Yes, all employees are added as a supplier. Verify the bank account and check number used for payment. If you have multiple bank accounts and both have separate checks, choose the correct bank account and that will set the check number to that of the next check number in its check register. If not the correct check number, type in the check number used. Add a reference in the ref field. Once again, references are strongly recommended as these are the explanation for the expense record. Moving down into the Expenses section, verify the expense account. Skip the billable, job number, and customer fields and enter the amount paid. Once the information has been entered and reviewed for completeness and accuracy, this time click the Save and Close button. This will save this expense record and then return to the main menu. Once expenses have been entered, there are two ways to view them. First is using the View Expenses button in the main menu. This shows all expenses entered, with the most recent payment date on top. There are numerous filters in the top section of this form to search and find any expense of interest. You can search by a specific reference or by party or supplier name. Search by a specific pay or by expense account. When customers have been added into the expense entry, those can be filtered as well. Furthermore, you can search by business check number or other pay ref that is used when using credit card, wire transfer, ACH, or EFT payment types. You can search by a date range by entering a date from and a date through into the fields provided. There is a job number as well as a PO number for filtering as well. And finally, a filter by payment amount. The billable options are used when adding expenses. Those expenses can be viewed by checking the Show All Billable Expenses. And lastly, check the Billable but Not Yet Billed option to show expenses that are not yet included within a customer's invoice. It should be noted that more than one filter can be selected. When multiple filters are used, the expenses that match all filters are displayed. For example, we just added an expense for the party staples with a payment date of April 2nd, 2024. If we select the party staples and then add a date range from April 1st, 2024 through April 30th, 2024, the result list of expenses shown are filtered to only show those that match this party and whose payment date was between April 1st, 2024 and April 30th, 2024. You will notice that as the filters are added, the expense records are displayed. And as we add additional filters, the list continues to be filtered further. Click the Clear label to reset or remove all filters, returning back to show all expenses with the most recent payment date on top. Another expense entry we added had a billable item. If we check the Show All Billable Expenses, the result list shows all expenses that had a billable item. If we then check Show Billable Expenses Not Yet Billed, the result list of expenses are those that have a billable item not yet included in a customer's invoice. If we want to view these expenses in a printable version, or one that is formatted for printing out, click on one of the expense report options in the top right. Click the View Expenses by Vendor. When prompted, enter the payment date from and through. This will show all expenses with a payment date range that was entered, sorted by vendor, party, or supplier. To print this report, select the Print option in the top left of the Access menu bar. To close this report, click on the X in the top right corner of this report. If a date range has been entered, then this same report will use that date range to filter the expenses, eliminating the requirement to enter a date range. We will keep this date range and open up the Pay Account Expense report. This will show all expenses with a payment date range entered, sorted by payment account. After viewing, click X in top right to close. Then move on to the Expense Account Report option. This will show all expenses with a payment date range entered, sorted by expense account. After viewing, click X in top right to close. Then the Date option. This will show all expenses with a payment date range entered, sorted by the payment date. After viewing, click X in top right to close. And finally, the Job Number option. After viewing, click X in top right to close. Click on the X in the expense form, and that will return you back to the main menu. A few other features worth noting is how to view the details of an expense entry and how to delete an expense entry that was entered in error. From the main menu, click on View Expenses. Use the filters to search and find the expense entry of interest. To view the expense, simply double-click on any of the fields to open the expense detail form. This form will show all details of the expense entry. If this expense is to be deleted, then click the Delete Expense button in top left. To prevent accidental deletions, click Yes to confirm the deletion, or No to cancel the deletion. If Yes is selected, the expense entry is deleted, the expense form is closed, and the expense list is refreshed. To save a little data entry time, an expense record can be copied. To copy, click the View Expenses in the main menu. Use the filter to search and find an expense entry that closest matches the new one that needs to be added. Double-click on the expense entry to view. From here, click the Copy button. Enter any missing information required for this new expense entry. In this example, we need to add the payment date, a ref number for the credit card charge, and then the payment amount in the expenses section below. After reviewing for accuracy and completeness, click Save and Close. The expense list will be refreshed and will show the new expense entry just added. Click on the X in the top right to return to the main menu. The second method of viewing expense entries is using the Expense Transaction View. From the main menu, click on the View Expense TRX, short for Transaction, button. This view is similar to that of the View Expenses form in that the default view shows all expense entries with the most recent payment dates on top. In addition, the filters at the top of the form are used to search and find any expense entry of interest. As with the other view, the result list of expenses displayed are those that match the combinations of any and all of the filters added above. The difference in this view is that as you select any of the expense entry listed, the credit and debit transactions will be shown in the bottom section. This section is refreshed for any entry selected. For example, we will view an earlier Lowe's expense entry created. Select the supplier filter, Lowe's above. Enter a date range from and to further filter the number of matching expense entries. Select the Lowe's entry. In the bottom section, left side, is the credit transaction that shows the payment account and the paid amount. The right section shows detailed transaction of the expense entry. One of these items was a billable item, and the customer is displayed along with the expense amount of each item. Similar to the other expense view, double-click the expense entry to view the expense form. This expense entry can be copied or deleted. To close this expense entry form, click on the X in the top right. This view also has the ability to view expense entries in a printable format. In the top right section of this view is the list of expense reports. Similar to the other view, if a date range from and to have been entered, that date range will be used to filter the expense entries contained in the report. The same reports are available by double-clicking on any of them to open. The list of reports are expense reports by expense account, by job number, by paid account, by payment date, by payment type, and lastly, by vendor. To close out of this expense view by transaction form, click on the X in the top right. This will take you back to the main menu. Thank you for watching this video. We hope that after watching, you have a better understanding of what a business expense is, the different types of business expenses. In addition, determining when an expense should be added through the Accounts Payable module in a form of a bill, and when to enter it as an expense entry in the Expenses module. We hope that our demonstrations were effective so you can confidently add an expense entry, be able to select the proper payment types, suppliers, and adding a meaningful reference. Understand when job number should be identified. Understand the concept of a billable expense and identifying the customer the expense is to be billed to. In addition, be able to use the filter options to search and find any expense entry of interest. Understand the different options to view the expense entries in a printable view using the various report options provided, and finally, how to copy and delete an expense entry. If you found this video helpful, please like it below. In addition, please click subscribe below so that you can be notified when we release new videos.